And as it pertains to the COVIDs, as mentioned many, many times, they will never admit that they got it wrong. I do believe, and I've talked about this on the News and Why It Matters over at Blaze TV, and that when you look at the CDC and them kind of just out of nowhere, just there was no like new evidence or anything that they collected between that period of time. They'll just say that, well, our records show type of stuff. They won't ever show you the data that they're relying upon. But the jig got up. It was up with Florida, but it was absolutely, they couldn't deny it when everything that they predicted about Texas, everything, that these deranged authoritarian weirdos, when they lifted all their restrictions, all of that, what they said was going to happen, did not happen. They were disastrously wrong on that, but they've been wrong about a lot of different things. It's just at that point, the jig is up. So in order to save face, to act like they had something to do with the shit, the CDC, of course, came out and they were like, well, our data, we're looking at it. If you are vaccinated, you can leave and you can do all of this stuff without wearing masks and all that, is what they said. But again, they'll never concede that they got it wrong. They got it wrong on the mask thing, and in terms of its effectiveness, it was not nearly as effective as what they claimed that it would be. The lockdowns have disastrous results that we will be feeling for years to come, if we're going to be completely honest. They'll never concede that they got it wrong. And here's another example of this, writing by way of the LA Times, the columnist. I'm going to read you the title before we go through the article. This is what the title says. You're going to get a kick out of that. Column: the evidence is clear. COVID lockdown saved lives without harming economies. Yeah, it sounds as stupid as it is, because that's exactly what this is. Let me see if I can blow this up real quick for you guys here, and we'll get to this. Let me shorten that right there. There we go. Let's go through this and see what these weirdos had to say about it all. Okay, cool. Here we go. The pandemic may be ebbing, at least in the U.S. and some other well-vaccinated countries. Okay, first of all, it has nothing to do with that. Remember Sweden? Y'all remember how Sweden just kind of came and went? Did they just forget about that? Sweden, the one country that did not do anything near to the degree that some of these other countries did. And they didn't have the problems that they claimed that they were supposed to have in the event they did it. I know they like to forget about that, but we knew the jig was up a long time ago. It's just, unfortunately, you had scared the populace and tricking them into that this was as bad as what it was, when it wasn't nearly. And that's more so what this is about. This simply was not the apocalyptic virus that they thought they were going to get. That did not happen. That didn't occur. And we had examples of that even outside of the U.S. We don't even have to go just within the United States of America. You look at Sweden as an example. They didn't have anything, and they just forgot about it. It was like it never happened. Goes to show, if you can control the information, you can control people. It says, but the debate over government and public response to the crisis is destined to live on. That's certainly the case with the government-ordered lockdowns. The most onerous and controversial policies imposed to keep people safe from COVID-19. Fortunately, they're also among the most widely studied policies, and research about their effectiveness is beginning to flow to economic and scientific journals. Here's a funny thing about that. Y'all remember, and I can't remember what the name of the video was and what show it was that we talked about, but there was an instance, it was in the U.S., where these experts, right, everybody's with the vast amounts of degrees that are supposedly the people we're supposed to listen to, they did a study among a bunch of counties, and they said that mask mandates, or rather restrictions, I can't remember which one it was, but basically one of those stopped, basically where those were implemented, they were basically going to have less hospitalizations as it pertains to COVID-19 and contracting that illness. And they had to end up retracting the damn statement, or rather the journal, a study, because obviously after more time went on, the reverse had happened. So they initially got the shit wrong, right? But because They were so itching to put out this narrative that equals keeping people safe, that equals less hospitalizations, and they had to retract that. I cannot remember what the name of the segment was or the show, but we did do that, and I may have to pull that up and hopefully maybe throw it in the comments or something. The published data point to two related conclusions. First, lockdowns played a significant role in reducing the infection rates. Second, they had very modest role in producing economic damage. Conversely, lifting lockdown has done very little to spur economic resurgence. It's funny because these guys are so disingenuous. You have to look at everything in context in terms of what happened with COVID-19 and what happened with the lockdowns. And rather the stifling of economic activity. So not only did you have the lockdowns themselves, where it was by way of executive order, a lot of governors deemed certain industries non-essential. Therefore, it was illegal in a lot of cases, let them tell it, for you to operate your business. Now, considering that, or you couldn't at least operate even in the same capacity as you wanted before, not because the individual business owners or even the patrons weren't willing to assume the risk. It's because they made it illegal, and obviously people don't want to deal with going to jail for the most part, and that's what happened. But you also have to couple that with the welfare statism and how through multiple trillion-dollar stimulus packages and COVID relief packages, as well as the trillions of dollars that have been printed throughout the last year. But let's focus on the welfare statism in itself. So you had all of these benefits that came with being unemployed. To act as if, and this is what guys like this that's writing this, his name's what is his name? Michael Hiltzik. And in which you talk about the slow of growth to get back to some sort of economic activity. You can't mention, or you can't not mention, what the state had to do with that, despite there being the reopenings, which is why you saw only recently, which we're talking about in the last couple of weeks, where you had people, because those April numbers came out and they didn't hit anywhere near the numbers that they wanted to hit. And you had states like Montana who basically said they weren't going to be participating in this sort of federal unemployment package, if you will, because people literally are being paid to sit on their behind. And if you offer them, you only make slightly less if you just don't work versus going to work and making slightly more. These lazy bums are going to, of course, take the latter. So you had people not working, and that is in combination with the lockdowns. You had the welfare state in. So to act like, well, the reopenings they're not really doing anything. You can't talk about that in this such a disingenuous way while acting as if the welfare state is, which again is the government's involvement in the lockdowns and the restrictions. You can't act like that had nothing to do with anything. Says some of the evidence for both propositions has been expertly compiled by Noah Smith, a former finance professor now writing economic commentary for Bloomberg. There's a flaw in Smith's presentation, however. His conviction that the issue is now moot since the pandemic is receding and the lockdowns are basically over due to rapid ramp up vaccination parts of most part of the U.S. Let's continue on. He says the lockdown issue is not moot at all. However, it's being kept alive by pandemic politics, which will endure. Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis thinks he'll be able to run for president in 2024 based on having outlawed lockdowns in much of his state without suffering in COVID statistics and protected his economy. Neither claim is true, as we've shown. What are you talking about? I can't read it. I have to subscribe. Well, I mean, I'm not going to subscribe, so I would love to know where that claim's coming from, because by all statistical metrics, Florida has not done worse than many of the states that have obviously or had these mass forms of lockdowns, or rather restrictions and mask mandates. It's not like he had, or Florida or Texas had, this just gigantic differentiation. And if it was as dangerous, and if that was as or much of a bad policy or lack thereof, then the numbers shouldn't even be close. Florida and Texas should be number 1 and 2 in terms of be it per capita when you actually dive into the numbers in terms of their hospitalizations and everything that are regarding this, at minimum. Though that is the only thing that you need to take into consideration. At minimum, it shouldn't even be close. Like the Swedens of the world, it shouldn't be close. They should be number 1, 2, 3. But that's not how it works. You got even across the entire nation. I know people like to look at some of the more like the guys that had like kind of restrictions and mask mandates, looking in spots of Asia and pockets of Asia, forgetting that Europe exists, as if these people that had during most of the pandemics the highest per capita per 1 million in terms of their death rates and hospitalizations had restrictions, had lockdowns, like the Frances of the world and what have you. They had all those, and despite that, the Sweden wasn't like way in front of them. That didn't happen. So this is the argument that I was making, is that it's less about saying that, okay, it didn't work, and more of saying that, well, I mean, because it didn't, but it's more of saying your evidence, or rather lack thereof, it's not conclusive, right? Your position is not conclusive in terms of, okay, you cannot make the positive claim that lockdowns and mask mandates equal less hospitalizations or less deaths or anything like that. You cannot make that claim. You simply cannot. So I would love to see what this says so we could dive into it, because that's interesting. Never mind that in due part to its residents having taken stay-at-home rules, social distancing, and masking seriously, California now boasts among the lowest case, hospitalization, and death rates in the nation, as well as a recovering economy. In comparison to the other states, this simply is not. It's a void and moot point, because they're not doing any better than the other states that have lifted, or rather don't have those same restrictions. So that's why that's a complete non-point. Doesn't matter. Lockdown appears to be all the recall backers have against Newsom, other than campaign slogans that consist of noun, verb, and French laundry. Debate over efficiency of lockdowns and limiting the spread of COVID-19 is certain to continue, in part because it's inextricable from partisanship. A team of UCLA researchers in a paper first published May 2020 and updated later found that likely Trump voters, all right, I don't really give a shit about any of that. Hostility to social measures short of lockdown, such as social distancing and mask, bears the same partisan bullcrap. Numerous studies from across the world have found that lockdown succeeded in suppressing the transmission rates. An Italian team found that lockdowns start to reduce. See, compared to what? It is, I guess, my question when we look at this. And I'll look at this at some point in terms of this Italian team. But compared to what? When you look at Italy, compared to what? Compared to previously? It's like, okay, your populace gets infected, they build immunity, hospitalizations go down. But you also had lockdowns. Does that mean that the lockdowns were the cause of that? Of course not. That you can't come to that conclusion. You can't. There are likely other factors to take into consideration. It makes sense, therefore, to examine the evidence, or rather gather ammunition for the coming debate. And this is what they claimed. Hold on. This is where I'm at. Found that lockdowns start to reduce the number of COVID infections about 10 days after they start, and keep reducing the case rate for as long as 20 days following initiation. Again, when you look at, and I should have, before we went to this article, I should have compiled all 75 videos that I've done that prove the exact opposite to the contrary. When you will literally see states in right next to each other, right? And you'll see one state has more restrictions, more or less restrictions than the other. And you'll see that the correlation doesn't exist. So, for example, California implement this and their case rate goes up. in comparison to like a Florida or something, which doesn't have it, and then theirs doesn't trend in the same way. There's so much evidence to the contrary of this fucking claim, but this is how these guys operate. That, and by evidence, I'm meaning like that literally is proven false in the fact that where those, let's say, lockdowns or measures are at, you're not getting the result that you claim is going to, or rather is supposed to take place. But they get to just rattle this shit off and say, well, yeah, because of reasons. There was something else that I wanted to. The first group saw rapid, and this is going from new French researchers in a paper published in January compared to the experience and countries that imposed stay-at-home orders early in the pandemic and lifted restrictions gradually. New Zealand, France, Spain, Germany, Netherlands, Italy, and Britain. To that of Sweden, which imposed no lockdowns, in the U.S., which had and still has a patchwork of state policies invoking blah, blah. The first group saw rapid reductions in infections and a rapid economic recovery compared to the second. Early onset lockdowns with gradual deconfinement allowed shortening of SARS-CoV epidemic and reducing contamination. See, again, lockdown should be considered as an effective public health. Again, like, compared to what? Like, if you have nothing else to compare it to, in terms of like that particular geographical area, because you impose the lockdowns, right? This is why something like, let's say a United States of America is unique, because in a lot of cases, when it came to this, a lot of the states were allowed to govern themselves or govern like their geographical area. So you had states that, of course, did not have the restrictions or didn't have as strenuous of restrictions in comparison to the others. So you can't say, well, we implemented lockdowns in this area and therefore their cases went down. Therefore, it's attributed to the lockdown. It's like, compared to what? What, like, compared to what? Because we know, objectively speaking, when you look at Floridas of the world, the Texases of the world, we know that there's evidence to the contrary. Interesting. This is what this boils down to. And they'll do this, and we called this, we said this would happen. They'll move the numbers around as much as they want to try to come to the conclusion that they somehow were justified in their criminal last actions. And I'm just going to be completely honest with you. I've obviously not been one for mince for words as it comes to this pandemic. A lot of these people belong in fucking prison. They are active aggressors, and they were active aggressors who aggressed upon entire geographical areas based on scaring people when it came to the COVID-19 pandemic or whatever you want to call it. It's absolutely amazing that these guys get to make these claims. Even the WHO, when it came to lockdown, were like, definitely when it came to the economics of it all. Even the WHO, I forget I can't remember the doctor's name, an ambassador, who was saying that lockdowns, because he was agreeing with Dr. Gupta of Oxford, if I'm not mistaken. I could be getting that wrong, but she had said that, talked about obviously the economic turmoil in which would be causing. The guy from WHO was saying she's right. She's absolutely right. Lockdown should be your last thing in terms of trying to mitigate this virus. And what he did, he started pointing out these examples, definitely to these countries who aren't the richest nations in the world, but they depend on a lot of like touring and stuff in order to bring in that sort of economic growth. And you completely obliterated that. And obviously they're going to feel a lot of that for years to come. There's going to be issues that come with this. And if you can see beyond what's directly in front of you, you'll be able to see that. But these criminals will never admit that they got it wrong. They'll never admit they got it wrong, ever. They will never admit that they got it wrong. They will never admit that they got it wrong. So that's what this is about. And you're going to see articles like that of them kind of, despite what the evidence, even in freaking America, what the evidence says to the contrary of what their claim is, they don't care. They think that they are justified, and they will present it that they were always justified despite them ruining motherfuckers' lives. And again, these guys belong in jail, period. You just watched a clip from my podcast, For Canon's Sake. Catch us live at 12 p.m. throughout the week over at youtube.com/YoungRipper59 and follow us over at odyssey.com/@YoungRipper59. If you want to watch the entire video cast after the show is over, just be sure to become a member on the YouTube channel. Of course, the full audio portion of the podcast is available for free on all major digital platforms, or just visit forcanonsake.com.